One of the enduring phrases from the Mueller report will be an admission from the White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders, that a claim she made disparaging the newly fired FBI chief, James Comey, was not founded on anything. Listen to what Sarah Sanders said at a briefing back in May of 2017.
What's your response to these rank-and-file FBI agents who disagree with your contention that they lost faith in Director Comey?
Look, we've heard from countless members of the FBI that say very different things.
Special counsel writes that Sarah Sanders admitted to his investigators that she had no basis for making that remark, which she tried to frame as a slip of the tongue made in the heat of the moment.
This morning, that is still Sarah Sanders' position. Here is Sanders on Good Morning America.
Special counsel writes that those comments were not founded on anything. That's what you talked to the special counsel about when you were facing criminal penalties if you didn't tell the truth, but now you're trying to walk away from it. Why can't you acknowledge that what you said then was not true?
I said that the word I used, countless, and I also said if you look at what's in quotations for me, it's that. And it's that it was in the heat of the moment, meaning that it wasn't a scripted talking point.
We're joined now by CNN White House correspondent Caitlin Collins, and here in studio, Julie Pace, Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press. Julie, let me start with you. Some of your colleagues think Sarah Sanders has lost the confidence of the White House press corps with this definitive assertion by special counsel Robert Mueller that she lied to the American people, a lie for which she is expressing zero contrition and no apology whatsoever. Do you agree? Has she lost the confidence of the White House press corps?
I think that the White House press office as a whole has lost the confidence of the White House press corps far before yesterday. I think we've been dealing with a situation where you have people who come out and speak on behalf of the president, on behalf of this administration, who say things that are factually inaccurate. We've been dealing with that literally since the first day of the administration. And I think it's really important to point out that the problem here isn't that Sarah Sanders or other people who speak for this administration are lying to journalists. It's that they're lying to the American people.
Right, absolutely.
That's the real problem here. And I would hope that no matter what your political persuasion is, the fact that an administration is lying to the public would really bother you.
You know, Caitlin, that clip we just played from 2017, that's not the only time that Sarah Sanders made that bogus claim, is it?
No, Wolf, she said it several times, and even when reporters gave her the chance to follow up on it because they didn't think what she said was accurate, even one reporter saying really to her during a press briefing when she said that a large number of FBI agents had reached out to her personally, she said, even though she didn't know that many people at the FBI, that was her indication that that many people had lost confidence in James Comey. So, Wolf, she said it multiple times under different iterances, said it a lot throughout several press briefings, though. So saying it's a slip of the tongue doesn't really compute since she made that argument so many times. And Wolf, it's also not the only instance in the Mueller report of her making a statement that was not true. She also said that the president certainly did not dictate that original misleading statement about the meeting that Donald Trump Jr. had at Trump Tower, when later it was revealed that his lawyers actually told the special counsel that yes, the president had dictated that statement. When Sarah was asked to clear that up today, she essentially made the argument that she was given bad information. And Wolf, I do think that's important because a lot of what you're seeing in this report starts at the top. And this report does have a pretty damning portrayal of a president who not only pressured his staff to lie, but also to minimize true events, deny stories that had been reported in the media, and at times just simply make things up.
And Caitlin, let me ask you, I mean, does the White House not see that all these lies actually to the American people, forget lies told to journalists, lies to the American people, that it's self-defeating, that they tell lies about things important and inconsequential, big and small, and ultimately all it does is hurt them, their credibility, especially when they then want to talk about issues that are of real significance, that have to do with policy and things that affect the American people's lives. Did they not understand that?
Well, a lot of people in the West Wing have a problem with the communications team, and they have had one ever since essentially the beginning, when it was back when Sean Spicer was the press secretary. So they realize that it's a problem because often it's the communications team here at the White House that becomes the story because of what they say. And I think it's important to keep in mind this isn't just the White House press shop and the reporters that cover the White House here going back and forth over whether or not Sarah Sanders is telling the truth. She's a taxpayer-funded press secretary, and what she says goes on the record, and she's supposed to say truthful things so the American people know what's going on inside the White House. Yes, she may put a positive spin on it for the White House to their perspective, but it's still supposed to be based in some sense of reality. And we're seeing that with these remarks, especially the ones about James Comey, it's just not true. And also, another pretty damning instance in the Mueller report about the White House press shop is when they wanted Rod Rosenstein to hold a press conference saying it was his idea to fire James Comey. They were essentially trying to send the number 2 at the Justice Department to go on television and say something that was not true so it would back up the president and make him look better. If that gives you any kind of instance of how the White House press shop is functioning here, and instead of trying to put good news out about what the president is doing, they're instead trying to make president's decisions look less bad.
You know, Julie, there's only been, I think, 2 White House press briefings in the past 100 days or in this current year. And I guess the silver lining is if you can't believe what the press secretary is saying, maybe it's better that they don't do those press briefings.
Yeah, I'm really torn on this because on the one hand, you go into these press briefings in the Trump administration and you get information that frankly isn't very useful to you. In some cases, it's inaccurate. In some cases, it's just not really relevant. On the other hand, I do think it's really crucial, again, to the point about informing the public, not because we want to sit in the briefing room, not because we think that we want to have our FaceTime on camera, because that is how a lot of Americans get information about what their government is doing. And the fact that that is gone, the fact that that is just no longer an expectation, not only at the White House, but also at the Pentagon, at the State Department. There are major policies that are being undertaken by this administration, and we simply don't have the opportunity to get the public information on a daily basis. That's a real problem.
Certainly is. Yeah, go ahead, Caitlin.
Well, I want to note one thing that we could start to see over the next few days. You saw it with that interview that Sarah Sanders did this morning, where she was trying to essentially back off the claims that she made to the special counsel's investigators. They made it pretty clear in the Mueller report that what she said was not founded on anything, that is what she told them. And today she was trying to frame it as simply a slip of the tongue, something she made in the heat of the moment, despite that being a comment that she's made multiple times. And so what you're going to see is potentially people trying to back off the comments that they made under the penalty potentially of lying to investigators when they told the truth. Then in the public, when they're speaking to reporters and anchors on news shows, they may be changing their tunes a little bit.
Because if you lie to the Mueller's team, that's perjury. You could wind up in jail. So she had to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in that particular instance. Caitlin and Julie, guys, thanks very much. Up next, I'll be speaking with a Republican member of Congress who once told me that that Barr should release the full report to the public. Does he still feel that way? Stay with us. This morning, Democrats fighting to expose the full Mueller report. The top House Democrat in the Judiciary Committee, the chairman, Jerry Nadler, issuing a subpoena last hour. This as Democrats dismiss Attorney General William Barr's findings and demand to hear from the man who authored the report, Robert Mueller. Joining us now with a reaction, Republican Congressman Chris Stewart of Utah. He serves on the Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. We've had this conversation before. You've previously told me several times you think every word of the Mueller report should be made public, should be presented to Congress. Do you support this subpoena that Jerry Nadler has now issued for the full unredacted report and all the underlying evidence?
Yeah, I do think that with the exception of the grand jury information, which frankly is illegal to release, I do think members of Congress should be able to see all of the other. Sitting on the House Intel Committee, of course, they want to protect sources and methods, but we deal with sources and methods all the time. Part of it is protecting our interactions with foreign governments, but again, we deal with foreign governments all the time. I think there are members of Congress who should see all of this, with the exception of, again, Wolf, the grand jury information, which is, again, illegal to release that, and probably appropriate to protect the grand jury process, that be held private.
It would only be illegal if a court intervened and said you could release it. In the report, the Mueller report, the special counsel details several episodes of possible obstruction of justice by the president, including an attempt to fire the special counsel. How concerning is that to you?
Well, you know, honestly, I'm a little bit surprised that there aren't more things in this that is embarrassing to the administration. After 2.5 years and $30 million and 49 FBI agents and attorneys, again, I thought there would be more. I don't think there's a single American who could undergo this kind of scrutiny and not find something over the last, years of their life that would not be embarrassing. But Wolf, there's a difference between some things that are embarrassing and concerning and some things that are illegal. Frustration is not obstruction. Being an emotional reaction or anger is not obstruction. And Mr. Mueller, I think, was pretty clear. It didn't reach a legal threshold to pursue an obstruction charge. And Mr. Barr has conceded that. And by the way, I think for those who are pursuing this, I think the American people are exhausted by it. I think they're so tired of it. And I think they're handing the president the greatest gift they could give him in the 2020 election. I think most Americans realize this is unfair to keep going and going and going and to not ever be willing to just say.
Let me get your reaction, Congressman, to this one sentence that's in the Mueller report. The president's efforts to influence the investigation were mostly unsuccessful, but that is largely because the persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out orders or accede to his requests. That's pretty stark, that statement right there.
Well, it is. But again, as has been explained, the president was reacting emotionally to what he felt was an unfair investigation from the very beginning. And he knew, as we know now, and as the House Republican Intel Committee concluded more than a year ago, we know that there was no collusion. We know that there was no conspiracy. So I don't think it'd be terribly surprising to find that sometimes during the course of these events, the president would be emotionally defensive of that. And he would say, I want the truth to be known. And if some of these individuals are pursuing things that he thinks is unfair at its core, that he would push back against that. But once again, Wolf, we know that it's really clear there was no conspiracy, no collusion. And we know that Mr. Barr looked at this and the special counsel looked at this and said there's no legal threshold to pursue obstruction charges. And if people don't accept that, then they're saying, well, Mr. Mueller was either incompetent or he's corrupt. And I just think that's a ridiculous thing to conclude at this point. I think we trust Mr. Mueller for the last 2 years, unless people don't like the conclusion he came to, and then they begin to say, well, he should have pursued this and didn't.
He had a very, very specific conclusion on Russian interference in the U.S. presidential election in 2016. I'll read the sentence, and it's right at the beginning of this document. The Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion, close quote. But last night, the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, once again said the president simply has a different view on Russian interference. Why do you think the president still doubts that Russia was behind an effort to interfere in the U.S. presidential election?
I have no idea what Mr. Giuliani is talking about, frankly. I think the president has said, and I've had conversations with him, he clearly understands that the Russians attempted to interfere in this election.
Well, he didn't say that at Helsinki after the summit with Putin. He said, I listened to what Putin said. He makes a strong case. I don't see why they would interfere. And that was, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's basically what the president said.
Yeah, but he clarified his comments shortly after that, Wolf. And by the way, I was one of the first members of Congress who said the president's wrong. He needs to clarify, and he did. But I know this. There was attempted interference, no question about that. Again, I think the president recognizes that. I don't know why Mr. Giuliani said what he did. The question is, did the administration or members of the campaign were they part of that? And obviously the conclusion is no. And I think it's interesting to note as well, Wolf, that's despite multiple attempts by the Russians and Russian agents to get them their coordination. And again, they rebuffed those attempts.
Congressman Chris Stewart of Utah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Outside of his report, we have not yet heard directly from Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Lawmakers certainly want to hear from him. Could his testimony change how we view his report? Stay with us. We have yet to hear directly from Robert Mueller since the release of the special counsel's report, but that is expected to change.
In a letter to the Justice Department, the House Democrats requested Mueller to testify as soon as possible. They set a deadline of May 23rd. Joining us now, Garrett Graff. He's a CNN contributor. He's author of the book, The Threat Matrix, Inside Robert Mueller's FBI and the War on Global Terror. Garrett, thanks very much for joining us. So once we do hear directly in testimony from Robert Mueller, you think what we heard from the Attorney General, which was a very glowing assessment of his report, that public attitudes will change?
You know, I've been saying for the last month that the summary that Barr presented of Mueller's work was inconsistent with sort of everything that we know about Robert Mueller and his career, sort of this idea that he would just absolutely punt on the biggest decision that he has ever been asked to participate in just didn't square with what we know of him as a pretty decisive and traditional conservative legal thinker. And I have to say, after reading the report yesterday, that's the Bob Mueller that we expected to see. It's someone who actually had a very clear reasoning for the framework that he presented. You know, that he was starting this with the assumption that working under the framework established by the Department of Justice since the 1970s, you cannot indict the sitting president. And so he was never planning to make a so-called sort of traditional prosecutorial decision on the question of obstruction, and always appears to have seen himself as basically an independent fact finder to use the criminal justice system to turn over evidence to Congress to consider for presidential malfeasance.
Mueller remains an employee of the Justice Department as special counsel, and we heard the Attorney General Bill Barr yesterday say he had no objections to Mueller testifying. Do you expect that Mueller will honor the request of the House Judiciary Committee and any other Democrats and answer questions and testify publicly?
I absolutely think he will. I mean, certainly if served with a subpoena of any kind, you know, Mueller will obey the legal proceedings. I don't know that we should expect that we're going to learn a tremendous amount of new information from him. I mean, let's look back over the last 2 years. This is someone who has not spoken publicly in his role as special counsel since the day that he was appointed, and that the 2 times that the special counsel has had something to say, Rod Rosenstein, as the acting attorney general in the matter, has come out and been the voice at the press conference. And so yesterday, again, we didn't see Mueller up there with with Bill Barr, with Rod Rosenstein, and with the principal associate deputy attorney general behind him.
We're told that he is at work today over at the Justice Department, Mueller, which raises the question, why wasn't he there at that news conference yesterday with Rod Rosenstein, who named him to be the special counsel, the deputy attorney general, and the attorney general, Bill Barr?
Yeah, and Barr sort of gave a weird answer to this, which is like, this was my role to do this today. Without addressing, I think, the underlying question of, was Mueller invited, was Mueller consulted as to whether he wanted to be there? But I would guess from what we know of Mueller that Mueller would have preferred to have been anywhere but there yesterday. I mean, this is, he's very clearly preferred to let his work speak for himself and itself through this entire process. And I would imagine that that's what we'll see.
They do have a 30-year relationship, Barr and Mueller. They're close friends. Their wives are friends as well.
Yes, but the friendship, to my understanding, exists more on the wives' side than on Barr and Mueller's side, personally.
I want to ask you about a tweet that you wrote this morning. It seems clear that Trump skillfully maneuvered his way through 2 sticky issues correctly, avoiding testifying and installing an attorney general who would obfuscate the report's findings. What are you trying to say there? That the president, you're not judging the morality of it. You're just saying that was skillfully done.
Yeah, it seems like you know, there were 2 very good political decisions that the president and his lawyers made through this to navigate through what we now understand from Mueller's report were some pretty sticky legal questions. One, cooperating enough that Mueller never wanted to press the issue of subpoenaing the president himself. So that we don't actually have the president nailed down personally in this. And then second, you know, Barr, you know, we have seen in the past President Trump complain about his attorney general not acting as his personal lawyer. You know, he's said, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" Sort of his former you know, legal mentor. And that this is something where we are seeing, you know, Bill Barr really acting yesterday as the president's personal defense attorney, not the chief law enforcement officer of the United States.
Garrett Graff, thank you so much. Russia says they did not interfere in the 2016 election, no matter what the Mueller report says. Next, what does that mean for what's ahead in 2020?